There are a lot of famous names in church history. There's Joseph and Emma Smith, and Hiram Smith and Mary Fielding Smith. But one couple that hardly anybody has heard of in the history of the church is Jesse and Minerva Gause. Jesse Gause is linked to Section 81 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And Section 81 is special because it's one of the major steps taken towards the creation of the modern first presidency that we're familiar with in the church. And this presidency of the high priesthood was to consist of a president and two counselors. Now, the original president was Joseph Smith, and the two counselors were Sidney Rigdon and Jesse Gause. Now, if Jesse Gause was important enough to be a counselor in the presidency of the high priesthood, how come nobody's ever heard of him today? It has partially to do with what happens to Jesse Gause in the history of the church. We don't even really have a photograph of Jesse Gause that we can show to you, or much information. What we know about him is relatively fragmentary. It seems that he was a former Shaker before he joined the church. And after joining the church, he was seen as a good leader, brought into the presidency of the high priesthood, and even traveled with Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon to Missouri to meet with the leaders of the church there. However, when Joseph Smith arrived home from the trip to Missouri, it seems like Jesse ran into troubles. He had some major issues with his wife, Minerva, who refused to reunite with him and join the church. They eventually split up together, and at some point along the way, Jesse Gause just kind of walked out of church history. The next reference that we have to Jesse Gause is that he was excommunicated in December 1832, a few months after he traveled to Missouri. Now, why even bring this up? Well, part of the reason is the earliest manuscripts of Section 81 of the Doctrine and Covenants show something really peculiar, and that is that the Revelation has the name Jesse Gause written into it, and then the name was crossed out, and the name Frederick G. Williams was written over top of it. Frederick G. Williams was the person that eventually filled this space in the first presidency and remained for the next 5 to 6 years. Now, that can be a little bit disconcerting. Can you just take any blessing and cross out a person's name and put someone else's name in? Could I do that with your patriarchal blessing, or a blessing of healing, or a blessing of comfort, or an ordination? Well, not really. Those are personal blessings that come to an individual. But the reason why we could do it in this case is because Section 81 wasn't really a blessing to an individual. It was a blessing to the second council of the first presidency. Those blessings would have been the same regardless of who was placed into that calling, because they're blessings that came with the calling and weren't necessarily tied to the individual.